You're listening to the School Growth Strategies podcast, brought to you by Hubly. In this show, John O'Landon draws on his vast experience and expertise to deliver actionable advice to private school administrators who are ready to take the next steps toward running a more efficient and sustainable private school business. I'm your host, Ryan Cowden, and this week we're joined once again by John O'Landon. In this episode of the School Growth Strategies podcast, Jono and I discuss the best practices to utilize when you raise tuition at your school. Tuition hikes can be challenging processes for private schools to navigate. Without a background in sales, many educators are either uncomfortable or unfamiliar with the processes involved in asking for money. In addition to this discomfort is the looming fear that these tuition hikes might cause families to pull their children out altogether and opt for a free education at a local public school. It's time to destigmatize this process. There's nothing wrong with asking for the money you need to pay your teachers, purchase supplies, and create the school experience your families expect. When handled correctly, you can safely normalize tuition hikes for yourself, your staff, and your families. In this episode, you'll hear why tuition hikes should be done annually at your school. Inflation goes up every year, so your prices should annually reflect the additional cost of doing business. Next, we'll discuss how to address educators' fears of losing families over tuition hikes. Losing families is a valid concern if families are only attached to the cost. But if you have connected with your families over a shared set of values, then there's a much better chance they will stick around and be with you in the long run. We will also address the issue of how much you should raise tuition. Your prices should mirror the cost of inflation, although some schools might need to hike prices a little more to catch up if they haven't been keeping pace with it until now. Then we will share some of the best ways to communicate with your families regarding these hikes. Be as open and transparent as possible about rising inflation, school costs, and also where the money is going. Show your families that the money is going right back into the school. And finally, we'll talk about why you shouldn't raise tuition if your enrollment is declining. If you are in this situation, your primary goal should be getting enrollment up, primarily through strategic, values-based marketing. If you're ready to reduce the anxiety around tuition hikes and improve the financial communication in your school community, then this is one episode you won't want to miss. There's a lot of actionable advice in this episode, so grab something to write with because you're going to want to take notes. As always, I'll be back on the other side to wrap up any loose ends. So without any further ado, here's my conversation with John O'Landon. All right, Jono, welcome back to the podcast. It's great to see you again.
Yeah, hey Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
I'm doing great.
Okay.
A little warm.
Yeah.
In my office today.
Yeah. No longer at the lake, are we?
No.
We got an interesting topic. Yeah, right. We're talking about raising tuition today, and I feel like that's an important topic that needs to be addressed. I think it'd be nice to give people a little bit of a background here. What exactly are the forces that push schools to raise tuition? Why does that have to happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it has to happen because most importantly, cost of living is going up everywhere. Mm-hmm. So we've got inflation, and so that's just something that you can't get away from. And at the same time, we're seeing that schools are, unfortunately, because of the growth of the market, and there's more schools popping up all over the place. As you know, I know we've talked about it in the past, but it's worth noting that the market of private schools in the U.S. has increased by 25% in the last 25 years, and it is not slowing down. Right, the government, different states and federally are supporting, subsidy programs that are making it easier and easier for, the charter schools are expanding, and subsidy programs are making it almost like any private school can work like a charter school, depending on the state that you're in. So what's happening is there's competition, and for people that are, I would say, less marketing savvy, one of their knee-jerk reactions is, oh, let's lower price. It's like everyone is actually, oftentimes I'm seeing schools lowering their price. They're going the opposite way that they need to be going, right? Mm-hmm. And that's because, unfortunately, when you don't have a strong marketing strategy, you're left just you know, taking your price down as low as possible, and usually it's too low to actually functionally run the school.
Okay. Great. Well, I think that's something that's worth focusing on. Can you say a little bit more about why it's counterintuitive? Why you should not lower your prices?
Well, you should not lower your prices because your expenses are not lowering.
Okay.
Like everything that you have to
Yeah.
pay for is going up with inflation. And so if you just keep on lowering your prices, then I mean, we're talking about a small local brick and mortar business. We're not talking about, a software company that can, raise a bunch of money from VCs and scale wild, just keep on onboarding free customers and with the hope of converting them to paying customers down the road.
Mhm.
Um, that a school has to manage their budget very, very tightly, and so your costs are going up, everyone's cost of living is going up, your teachers need to be paid more,
Mhm.
electricity is going to everything's becoming, milk and eggs and electricity, everything's going up.
Right.
so
Right.
so so
Okay.
uh
So
you
costs
know
have to go up. Yeah.
yeah, everything has to go up too.
I mean, if you ever hear an administrator say, "Look, we're just worried that if we raise our prices, we're going to lose families,"
Yeah, every
what's
day.
your okay? What's your response to that? What do you tell them?
Well, again, it all comes down to the very top of the marketing funnel. If that is a valid concern, if you're not marketing based off values and making sure that you're bringing in families that, at least for the most part, are able to pay full tuition and are so in line with what you do, particularly as a school, that they're happy to pay your current tuition and happy to pay more, um, and obviously able to, right? So a good marketing strategy will pull in customers that are aligned with what you do, um, and happy to pay you and able to pay you, right?
Okay.
So you need to have a strong core of parents that are able to cover full pay tuition that's going to go up and increase incrementally year after year,
Hmm.
um, if at least with inflation,
Right.
if not a little bit higher than inflation.
Okay. So that leads right into the next question I had, which was, how much should you be raising tuition? What do those increases look like?
Yeah, so the minimum amount is, if you've done a really good job of setting the right tuition for your school, then minimally you got to go up with the increase, the inflation.
Okay.
Um, but uh, most schools today haven't been doing that, so they generally probably need to, go a little bit more because a lot of schools just have some gap to fill. They got to catch up with where they really should be.
Hmm.
So of course, you gotta be realistic. You need to make sure that what your expenses are, and 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 again, this all is solved when you've got a strong marketing system. And if we're talking about budgets, you got to make sure that your marketing budget is, you're assuming a certain marketing budget based off a cost of acquisition of a customer, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, any business that exists has to understand what the cost of acquisition of a customer is, and everything should be based off that. How much does a customer, bring in? Whether you look at it like a student, like per student or per family, and so how much revenue comes in? What are your expenses per customer, to provide the
Hmm.
school and the education to that child or family? And what does it cost you to acquire that customer? Right. So if you build everything around that, and everything is equalized on a per customer basis, then then you've got then you really have a strong budget, and then you really know how you're going to uh, get the customers that are going to bring in the right amount of revenue.
Right. Right.
Revenue
So
per.
okay. Right. So I guess if we're matching tuition, that or matching inflation, that means we're raising tuition every single year.
Yes,
That's the plan? Okay.
absolutely.
Okay. You got to do that.
Yep.
Is that something that you are communicating to families up front? that tuition is just going to go up every year, that's an expectation for the families to have?
I think it's always good to be as transparent as possible.
Okay.
Um, it's also important to, again, we're talking about, I mean, uh, as we spoke about in the last podcast, a lot of schools offer subsidies, and I support that, and I think it's a really good idea. But but you also have to know how much subsidies you can provide, and you're gonna be able to provide that if your tuition is going up the proper amount. So that all needs to be calculated into how much your tuition is. Like if you're going to be offering subsidies, well, then the parents that are paying full tuition should be paying those subsidies from
Sure.
their tuition,
Okay.
right?
Right.
So so um, so yeah, I guess that answers the question.
Sure. I'm interested in how this does get communicated. Is this something that you put out in like an email blast, or do you kind of recommend doing like town hall meetings or something? Like, how do
Yeah.
you?
Okay. So
Yeah.
actually, I didn't answer the question properly.
Oh,
So the way you communicate it, I think, is depends on what stage the parent is at in the process. So, when someone's just inquiring about the school or they're calling in, that's not the right time to talk about tuition increases because they haven't even like
right.
come in yet, right?
Sure.
But when so it could be part of the contract, and I would say part of the enrollment contract, or whenever you're having a tuition conversation or a document about tuition, I think it's good to have some language in there so that they know that this is this year's tuition, and we have regular increases, to meet the needs of the school, its community, the school's goals, long-term goals of the school, because you also have to be putting retained earnings away to grow,
Yeah.
expand, improve, right? You need money in the bank, right? So all of those things are part of it. And unfortunately, I meet a lot of schools that are just not thinking in those regards, and they are panicky, and they're really if they don't like asking people for money, and because they have for the most part, these are businesses that are run by amazing educators.
Yeah.
They have a teacher's heart, and they have they just it's as a profile, as a personality profile. um they're much stronger at educating children than they are developing a business plan that will be expansive, and
Yeah.
will take them through growth.
Right.
So it's a challenge. It's a real challenge for this market. To This is where the topic of tuition increase is when everyone starts to really panic.
Yeah. Well, I guess it makes sense that you would panic, but if it's just a part of business as normal, I guess that there's things that you tell your customers to do. Are you trying to make it a normal process for them? Like, are you trying to normalize this as a way of
Oh
getting
yeah,
over
well,
their
what I'm
fear?
trying to normalize is not working as a volunteer at your own business. Because actually,
Okay.
so many of the
Yeah.
customers, when they start working with us, they've gone through a couple hard years, and they're working for free,
Hmm.
you know, um, or they're working for below the poverty line,
Yeah.
and it's they're doing it through heart, and
Yeah.
they're amazing people, and they're amazing educators, and all their students are lucky to have them. But the question is, are they going to be able to keep on doing this?
Yeah.
When they're you know when they're living like that. I mean, you can only do so much, right?
Sure.
So we really try to help them sort of snap into the right mindset in regards to these business topics, because
Yeah.
nobody really teaches this stuff to teachers.
Not to teachers.
Yeah.
And especially if you have a background in public education, it's just not something that you're even thinking of is
Right.
money. You're
Oh
not
yeah.
used to thinking of it at all.
Yeah. So there's a real in the public world, there's a real disdain for the idea of people paying for education,
Mm.
and it's and I mean that's a whole political conversation, but
Yeah.
but people that I would say the vast majority of people that open up independent private schools, whether they're for profit or not for profit, I mean these are these are people with the heart of an educator, and they're just trying to provide the best education possible.
Right.
And there's many scenarios where doing it outside of the public system is the best way, either for them or for the people in that area. So, because every area's got its own challenges and demographic makeup and what have you. So, um, so it's just this challenge um, that has it's very pervasive,
Sure.
across the whole education world, and it's not an easy thing to solve,
No.
so because it really comes down to a sort of a natural people generally tend to gravitate toward their natural talents and their strengths, and avoid the things that they're not comfortable with, right? That's just human nature,
Hmm.
and unfortunately this it's I see schools doing this year after year,
Yeah.
and really working themselves people school directors, owners, working themselves to the bone for essentially getting paid part-time. I mean, it's very common to see people administrators or directors working part-time, sorry, getting paid part-time and working, full-time and a half,
Mm. Right.
almost full-time on volunteer,
Right.
just to
Right.
get the actual job done. So,
Sure. Sure. I guess it's insisting that educators are aware of what they're worth, right? Like, is that kind of what it comes down to?
yeah. So, yeah, and it's just like, getting used to getting used to asking for money, because it's a very hard thing. I also, I come from the music world too, and I studied music my whole life,
Hmm.
and I have a degree in jazz performance, and a lot of my music school friends, again, kind of, the average, musician is not necessarily the best at sales in business. So I was kind of that natural guy, and that's why I ended up having a booking agency, and everybody was like, "Oh, can you manage my band?" And I ended up with not even wanting to or meaning to, but I ended up managing a whole bunch of artists just because everybody wanted to just stay as far away from the business side of things as possible. So, like, I just see a parallel there where I would see my friends performing at a club or something, and then sheepishly, almost apologetically, try to sell their music, their CDs or whatever it is, feeling like bad that they're even asking for money, and it's just like, well, they scrounged up their little amount of money they could and went to a recording studio and paid a lot of money to the recording studio to produce this amazing album, and then they feel bad asking for $10 for a CD. I mean, obviously we don't sell CDs anymore, but back in the
Yeah.
day, right? So
Right.
so
Right.
it's like, it's kind of a similar thing to me. I see, like,
Mhm.
people are wonderful educators. They don't really think about asking people for money because they're just going into school trying to connect with kids, and then, a certain amount of them are like, they ended up running a school because either the spot just needed to be filled, or it's just like, okay, they wanted to try something different, or they wanted to open up a school, or they you know because obviously teachers' pay is also really capped at a fairly low level. So
Mm.
so they so they but they haven't developed that skill. It's a skill, understanding. It's a skill. It's a muscle that needs to be exercised. And it's just, and you need a trainer. You need somebody to coach you and help you with that. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of people doing that for schools.
Mm.
So that's one of the things we, obviously we try to do is coach them into how to, approach these things with parents,
Yeah.
and yeah. So,
Okay. Great. Before we move on, are there any other tips you want to share about transparency? You don't want to try to sneak these things by the parents. So
oh well,
even if they're
definitely not.
expecting it, yeah,
And that's just in general with any,
yeah,
with kind of any business and any customers. Like, you want to, it's like, yeah, if you try to increase your tuition, but like, you want to do it proudly. It's like, so when you're sort of selling this tuition increase, which you should be doing every year, it's like, hey, well, here's the tuition increase, and this is why we're increasing the tuition. this is inflation. Here's what the inflation is, and here are the goals we have, for this increased revenue. So that yes, it's important to know that the parents don't think you're just pocketing the money and sticking it in your bank account. They want to see that it's being reinvested back into the school, and how and where. It's because they're paying for. I mean, just like currently, from one year to the next, like they're paying for a result, right? The
Mhm.
school's providing a very, very incredibly essential service, for this parent is handing you their child and paying you tens of thousands of dollars in a lot of scenarios, and you're having a major influence on the future of their child, right?
Right.
So um so they're paying for that, and they're already doing that. So let them know what else they're going to be getting this year, and I would say put it together, make it accessible to them, and I think if it's all in the way you approach it and communicate it.
Okay. Great. So, kind of, just in conversation with you, the one caveat that you've mentioned is not raising tuition if you have declining enrollment, or if it feels like there's maybe not the support from the community. If you're looking at a situation where there's declining enrollment, what's kind of your first step to kind of start turning things around?
Yeah, the first step is like, do anything you can, divert as many resources as possible to getting the enrollment up,
Okay.
and working with experts to do so, because marketing is not something that is easily figured out, especially with, um, right, like the way parents need to be marketed to today. What actually works to engage parents and get them to show up for tours was very different than what worked 20 years ago. And the things that do work, meaning like, digital marketing platforms, online marketing, those tactics are quite advanced, and they take a lot of time to learn. And the probability of taking your money and flushing it down the toilet is incredibly high. And that's why you need to make sure you're working
Okay.
with experts that will make sure that at least it works. It might not, depending on who you work with, one team might be better than the other, but you want to make sure you're working with people that at least make sure you don't make a silly sort of. There's like, let's say when you're using Facebook ads, there's like 100 settings, right? And
Hmm.
if you put one the wrong way, you're going to get zero. You're going to pay a lot of money and get zero results. It's like think of like an airplane cockpit. There's just levers and settings and switches all over the place, and you really need to know, right? Like, you wouldn't just hop in an airplane and try to fly it,
Right.
right? You need to make sure that you go
Yeah.
through lessons with an experienced pilot and educator, right? It's not something you just jump into and do. And unfortunately, people think they can do that. And unfortunately, the platforms like Facebook and Google make people think that they can, and that's really unfair, because they really shouldn't, and they can't. You need to work with experts,
Hmm.
especially for an enrollment marketing campaign, for a private school. The way you need to use those platforms is a more advanced way than the way like a big national brand like Coca-Cola would use it, um, which is which you know uh, so I don't want to get off topic, but the important thing to know is that no matter who you work with, make sure that they're an expert. Do not ever spend money and just run some Facebook ads, because it's almost guaranteed you're just going to be wasting that money, and
Okay.
no school's got money to waste. So,
Right.
but that's what you have to do. I would say divert as much of your, even if you have to, and this is like a horrible conversation to have with anybody. Nobody likes to lay people off or let people go, but if you don't have the enrollment you need, then you need to make sure that you're not paying for things that are not, because if you don't have students, you don't have a school, and if
Yeah.
you don't have revenue coming in, you're not going to have a school for very long. So sometimes schools really need to make that hard choice, even if it's just for a short time. Let somebody go for 3 to 6 months so you can put that salary or you know some other expense that you don't need to pay for, um, into the right marketing strategy so that you can grow your enrollment, because it's really not hard to do it if there's just a few things you need to do the right way. And there's a million things that you shouldn't do. That's the real challenge, is that schools are doing so many things that they should not be doing that are all just a waste of time and money. And it's so hard to watch. And it's really painful to see what schools are doing. And it's really, everyone's doing the same mistakes across the board. It's very frustrating.
Okay.
So there's just a few things you got to do the right way. You will get enrollment. It'll grow. And then, if you had to let someone go, hopefully you can keep that relationship and bring them back, and maybe you'll be in a position to pay them better,
Right.
That's one of those sort of hard business decisions you have to make sometimes, but it's worth it. If you don't have the right enrollment, then you got to stop paying for other things and get the marketing happening first and foremost.
Okay.
And unfortunately, marketing is the last thing that most people that are running schools, school leaders think about. It's like the afterthought, because they're all focused on, like education and materials and all that stuff, which is, of course, has to be there. But all of that is a total waste of money if you don't know how to get students in the door.
Right. And that's why tuition has to go up eventually. Right.
That's right.
Great.
And how much, so again, you need to, it should be incremental. Can't jump it up too much. But what you can do is, you can increase it more for new families, right? It's not fair to increase tuition too much for existing families. So I would say, make up the margin with new families. Have a good marketing system that brings in new families that are able to pay higher amounts, and they don't have a previous year's tuition to compare it to complain about, right? So that's one way you can do it. Like, make a bigger increase for new students and a smaller increase for returning students.
Okay, great. John, that was fantastic. It was really helpful. Thank you so much. It's great.
Yeah, well, I'm here to help.
Yeah, great. All right, we'll see you next episode.
Thanks, Ryan. See you then.
Bye. All right, folks, there you have it. That wraps up my conversation with John O'Landon. He shared a ton of valuable insights and advice today on how to handle tuition increases at your school. We also shared some tools and resources, which will all be linked up in the show notes. I hope you enjoyed our conversation. Please consider subscribing, sharing with a friend, or leaving us a review in your favorite podcast directory. Until next time, best of luck in all that you do, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the School Growth Strategies podcast.